Hello everyone and welcome to the third in our series of 6 Twilight talks from Gayfield Creative Spaces, generously supported by Creative Scotland. Details of the next 3 talks are in your brochure. Tonight's talk is entitled Garden in Mind. I only recently became a gardener, but I've a mother who's a super talented plants woman and a father who she'll occasionally let mow the lawn. What I've known from childhood, and I know now for myself, is that gardens bring people together. Gayfield is also about collaboration, and it's been my very great pleasure to bring together 3 powerhouse speakers tonight that also have gardens in mind. Celine Sinclair of The Yard, Richard Murphy OBE, architect, and Pollock, Professor of Landscape Architecture at Stirling University. My former work as a GP and my interest in dementia led me 2 years ago to the influential work on designing gardens for people with dementia by Professor Pollock. One of our core interests at Gayfield, and the theme of our talk tonight, is to explore where art and design meet health and well-being. We know it intuitively, and sound research backs it up. Our environments and our tools for living affect our well-being and our health. Annie has contributed to this research, and it's a great privilege to have her talk with us tonight. I'm also delighted in the audience sits Carol Sinclair. No, she's not sitting in the audience. She didn't make it through. I thought I saw her coming in. She's a ceramic artist, and Carol's works entitled Fragments is exhibited in our Making Well space at Gayfield. It's quite a beautiful triptych, a reflection on memory and memory loss, and our identities and relationships. Our design library at Gayfield also contains books by all 3 of our contributors. Richard Murphy I've known for several years, enough for me still to be chasing his signature on his book, 10 Years in Practice, released around 15 years ago. Richard has brought a fresh, innovative and challenging design eye to many projects, and I'm honoured that he's here this evening to share some insights. Celine Sinclair I've only known for a few months. I'm so grateful to Louise Dickens, who's here tonight, for introducing me to Celine, to Jenny, to Emma, and all the team at the Yard just this year. Thank you so much for hosting this event tonight. The Yard makes an appropriate partner venue. They have a wonderful garden. You can see it through the doors, and hopefully, if the weather holds out, a little bit afterwards too. Designed to support the needs of young people and families managing autism and learning disability. I know from the experience of friends that their service is highly valued, but in too short supply. I'm going to hand over to Celine just now, but leave you with a further thought. I believe our health service does most people well most of the time, but there are significant and important gaps. And I also believe that it's through supporting the talents of tonight's speakers and their like that good design can address some of those gaps. Thank you very much for coming, and I welcome Celine.
Thank you very much, John. Welcome everybody to the Yard. We're delighted to have been chosen to host one evening of this series of innovative talks and to open our garden and centre to you all. And I hope that we'll be able to show you around a little later if the weather holds out. For the benefit of those of you who don't know anything about the Yard, I'm going to attempt to give you a quick synopsis. I'm not known for my brevity about the Yard, but I'll do my very best. The Yard is the only indoor and outdoor adventure play centre in the east of Scotland. And here we run play sessions and youth work sessions for around 2,000 disabled children from the Lothians and beyond, many of whom have multiple and complex needs, and all of whom show tenacity, spirit, and determination every single day of their lives. Emma's going to show you some of the slides here that we have, and we work with 32 schools. We run sessions every day for special schools within the city and out with the city. And we also provide youth clubs every evening, respite for families, And we also do training on quite a broad range of subjects around disability and inclusive play. We're open 360 days a year, 7 days a week, from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. When you're here, whether it's day or evening, thanks to lots of natural light, as you can see, and our beautiful mature trees, it very much feels like a haven in the city. We are, in essence, a self-funding organisation, and we receive a very small grant of just over £20,000 a year from the local authority, and the remaining £650,000 we generate, driven by Jenny, ourselves, much of it through fundraising. So very, very fair to say that there's never, ever a dull day in the yard. Our story, however, is not a typical of organisations that provide respite and care and support for families with children with disabilities. For the majority of organisations, the garden space is an afterthought when the buildings have been designed and completed, and then with a dwindling budget and a make-do attitude, the garden is then constructed. For the yard, however, our garden space is the very roots of the organisation, and from there our culture has blossomed over 20 years. So how did we come to be here? Well, this is the original garden that was built, and 26 years ago, a group of parents and special needs teachers came together and approached Edinburgh City Council and asked if they could have a bit of ground. And they were given a piece of what was then waste ground, and they built this very garden as a secure adventure play space for children with complex needs. And every weekend, children and families came down to play within the garden, and it was very clear very quickly the benefits of having an outdoor space for children with disabilities. Children of all abilities got the chance to have fresh air, expend energy, socialise, and importantly, have fun. 5 years later, BBC Children in Need supported what was then a very small charity called Scotland Yard to build the indoor centre. And this is our original, you're in the original indoor centre here, and this is what it looked like many years ago. 18 months ago, we went through one further transformation when we won DIY SOS. I don't know if any of you have seen it, with Nick Knowles. And 300 tradespeople turned up from right across Edinburgh and beyond, as far away as Southampton, and gave us a rather magnificent facelift. We see our role in the lives of children and families as an ambitious one. We provide care, we provide support, and fun and friendship in equal measure, whilst also encouraging children and families to let go and promote challenge, personal growth, and supported independence for their children. The yard garden, as you can see, is a large space, and it's designed to be flexible enough to allow our play team, we have 20 paid play staff here, to facilitate changing dynamic experiences for children. We have very limited fixed equipment so that the play workers can create all sorts of different experiences, and so that the environment can be truly inclusive for children of all abilities. We do arts projects such as this, and we have large painting pendulums so that children with very limited mobility can create large canvases. We sometimes turn our solar dome into a space where we run for our teen clubs to have a hot tub night with pretend cocktails, but all of it is about sharing space together. Other times we'll put hay within the solar dome so that children will get a chance to have the smell of hay, etc., and feel like they're in a farm environment. For all of the kids, it is a chance to be outdoors and to be active and to enjoy a degree of autonomy and freedom that they rarely experience elsewhere. That's very much in large part as a result of disability. We see on a daily basis how this contributes to the well-being and happiness of children and the families that come here. The reality for children of life for children with complex needs is that they are very often moving or being moved from tarmac macadam playgrounds at school to flats or houses with very, very limited or no garden space at all. Here, they have the chance to have fresh air, they have the chance to have exercise, which in turn improves physical health, it improves their sleep, it improves mood through exploring, experimenting and being challenged and taking risks. We can see this wee boy here. You'll get a chance to have a play yourselves in the foam later in our stream. None of what we do here at the Yard, however, is risk for risk's sake. Rather, it's designed to promote physical development, social communication, and to give children a vibrant experience and a sense of achievement. We do often take access to natural light completely for granted, and to experiencing simple elements, wind, rain, sun, and sometimes that can be very difficult to access for families who have children who are extremely challenging. It can be very, very hard to find. Here, children get a chance to play freely with water, as you can see, and sand. And we'll often set up tire pools, just tires all together with tarpaulins inside it, and fill them with different materials. So we fill them with water, for example. We also fill them with autumn leaves so that children get a sense of the different textures and smells. And it's fun to chuck leaves about. Sadly, or, of course, you can dig your own hole. And Joseph actually quite literally likes to dig his own hole with a metal spade, you can see, rather than a plastic one, which is often, in environments now, children would not be allowed to do things like use a metal spade. Sadly, a number of our children and young people have life-limiting conditions, and bereaved families take great comfort in visiting the Yard and volunteering within our garden when their children have passed away. Many of our children and young people also have very limited contact with nature, so we allow our grass to grow long so that children can feel it and smell it and touch it. We're not just lazy gardeners, there is a purpose to it. Our sensory garden also provides new textures, tastes and smells, and you'll get a chance to wander around our sensory garden. You can see a picture of it here, which also has musical instruments in it. Our wildlife, as you know, in central Edinburgh is very limited, but we do have a great number of squirrels that share our space. And recently, when I was walking out in the garden, I spotted a squirrel perched inside one of our wheelie bins looking for treats. And one of the pupils tugged at me excitedly, shouting, "Look, look, someone has thrown away a perfectly good squirrel." Recently, a survey of the barriers facing disabled children was undertaken in the UK, and it showed rather painfully that the greatest barrier to enjoying life for children with disabilities is loneliness and social isolation. What we do here helps end some of that social isolation, and children and young people hopefully have the chance and the support to make friends and have fun, because that is, I'm sure you all agree, an essential part of childhood. And it's an essential part of the well-being and the mental well-being of children, as well as their confidence and self-esteem. This year, the Yard has exported its way of working with children to brownfield sites across Edinburgh. And this year, in the summertime, we ran a project in a brownfield site in one of the city's most deprived areas, Muir House, and this was the site that we were given. Many of the local children in Muir House, when not actively engaged or challenged, are very liable to be disruptive. So, just with a temporary shed and lots of enthusiasm and the experience of play staff, we turned a barren site into a vibrant garden with bales of hay, tyres, logs, and all manner of recyclable materials that provided fun and stimulating activities. And around 40 children came every single day throughout the school holidays. It was a very simple model to turn a barren space into a usable garden, but it provided a lot of activities for children. So just to sum up, for us, we think that having a secure garden is a very simple but effective model, and it's one that we would like to see citywide for children with disabilities, indeed across Scotland, and we hope to be able to achieve that. And I look forward to showing you around later this evening.
Good evening. My name is Richard Murphy. I'm an architect in Edinburgh. I thought I'd puncture a few myths about architects, that we're desperately artistic and we've got all our own agenda, which completely eclipses any other person's agenda, not least the client. Secondly, that we can only do one sort of building, and therefore, if we're given another sort of building, we're completely hopeless. And thirdly, that we're all masons. Well, I'm not a mason. So I'd like to show you that because I'm going to show you some health buildings that we've been doing. And I don't consider myself a health building architect. And in fact, if I was, I probably wouldn't do these buildings. And what's interesting about them, and it's quite interesting because it segues quite nicely into the next talk, is it's all about circulation. Now, I want to talk to you about things called plans, which is things that we can't see, but plans are incredibly important about a building because they determine how people find their way around, how they understand a building, how they expect to find certain spaces, how they have a sort of what we architects call a hierarchy of spaces, etc., etc. And I've done quite a few health buildings from small to now quite big ones, and every time I go to a health building, I take a photograph of this because this is the experience. That's one hospital, that's somewhere else, that's somewhere else. Is this all very familiar to you? In other words, it's what we architects call a double-loaded, artificially lit corridor as a circulation system, and that is the standard circulation system in any health building, whether it's a doctor's surgery or a major hospital. And I could have shown you other photographs where the corridor has got wider and some poor nurse actually ends up working in this miserable space, and then we wonder why the NHS doesn't hang on to its staff. And so I'm interested in doing the opposite, and there's a very interesting Dutch architect called Herman Hertzberger who gave a talk at the RIBA when he got the gold medal about 3 years ago, and he said the title of his talk was all his life he'd been crusading against the corridor. Well, me too. And I'm going to do a little run through projects where it's the same ideas come around again and again. First of all, a building which may be familiar to you. This is the Maggie Centre, as it was, and this is the Maggie Centre as it is. Those of you know Maggie Centres that are now spread all over the country, if not beyond, and they are sort of drop-in places for people with cancer, and they're supposed to be, in a way, what the hospital across the road doesn't give you, which is human contact, humanity in terms of how to deal psychologically and socially with the problem of fighting cancer. Now, a Maggie Centre is really easy because I'm going to show you those diagrams very quickly about the plan, but the point about a Maggie Centre is that it's the opposite of hospital. It's an anti-institutional building. So I have said, right, we'll start off and we'll have no circulation, we'll have no corridors. And of course, when you come into a big space, and from that big space, you can see all your destinations. So that's very easy in a very small building, obviously. You come in, and it feels like a little house, and from this double height space, you can see where you're going into the kitchen, or whether you're going upstairs, or whether if there's something on, then the sliding screen's pulled across. If there's nothing on, you can see the space that you've got to go to. That was very, very easy. Then we're going to move up in scale to a large group practice we did in Cameron Toll, just near the shopping centre there, and in a slightly sort of controversial site. And we were trying to give the impression that it was a walled garden, that you entered into a walled garden. And again, I mean, my doctor's surgery that I go to is just a corridor with doctors off the corridor. Here, the idea is you walk in and you find yourself facing into a garden, and the waiting room is not a waiting room, but it's a waiting area. Those are members of my staff pretending to be ill, by the way. And basically, the idea, there isn't a corridor. I mean, there is a little corridor to a sort of minor ops suite there, but that's not really important. Basically, so you come in and you get the receptionist, and then all the doctors are here. So you go in, you sit down, but importantly, you don't look at the doctors and the patients. You look out at a garden, which was a secret garden. You didn't know it was there. And then when the doctor's ready, he just comes along, sticks his head over the wall and says, "Mrs. Jones, it's your time now." And in you go. And then over here is a couple of dentists. And then we've got a sort of subset, a little sub-waiting area for a couple of nurses here, but it's the same idea. So there isn't a corridor. So in other words, as soon as you walk in, you can grasp the geography of the building, you can relax, you're not apprehensive about where to go. You basically feel you're sitting in a garden in the summertime. If you want to, you can go for a walk in the garden, and then the doctor is obviously where they are. And that's We didn't have any money for many plants, by the way, but that's the garden. That's someone having a party in it. This is the NHS. Then we're going to move up slightly again. I mean, we could count the number of destinations, the red dots on the plans, if you like. This is a project in Belfast, which is, it's finished, but it's not officially published yet. So the snaps I have are just mobile phone snaps, and this is a computer drawing, obviously. But it's basically a centre for people with mental health problems, and it's quite interesting, actually, because it puts together 3 things which have never been done before. One is what you're looking at there, which is like a little house, which is a place for 8 patients who can have overnight stays up to about 2 weeks. So in other words, if people have a mental breakdown, they don't end up going into a big mental hospital. Or it is, if you go straight along that line, you end up in a facility which is either a bit like the mental health equivalent of going to see your doctor, where you have an hour's consultation with a psychiatrist, or you have a day centre or a half-day centre. So again, the idea is to not have a corridor. So there's the house. You go into the house, and there's a big double-height space there, and all the rooms are grouped around the double-height space. This is service land, so there are no patients here, so we're allowed a corridor at that point, excuse me. But this is the main entrance, and again, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 psychiatrists, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 destinations on the day centre. So I've forgotten what the first one was, but that's about 25, 26 destinations. Well, normally, if in a situation like that, you have a corridor with 13 rooms on either side, and job done, you know. But that's deeply, deeply, deeply depressing. So what you do is, what we did was we arranged the rooms, as you can see, in a kind of snaking form, and they look into little walled gardens, because privacy is very important, as you can imagine, just like it is in a GP surgery, and similarly walled gardens here. And then as soon as you enter, you see a garden. So basically the idea is the entire geography and the orientation of where you are in the building is all about where you are on the edge of a garden. It's a pretty appropriate evening, as I'm going to hand over to Annie here to talk about how you design the gardens. So these are just snaps from my mobile phone, I'm afraid, because we don't have a sort of proper photograph. So that's it, more or less finished. There is the courtyard, and everyone's circulating around that. On the first floor is offices. There's no patients upstairs. And then you're sort of walking around. That's my colleague in Belfast. On the inside. Oh, there's fun things. I mean, in a consultation room, what we didn't want it to be, particularly in Northern Ireland, is to have the feeling that it's like a sort of police interview room, you know. So there's a big sort of couch, which appears like a huge piece of furniture on the outside. So you have a sort of sense that it's where you're about to go to. Anyhow, so that's a mental health centre in Belfast. And then closer to home in Fife, we have the same principle in a slightly kind of less public building, which is a centre for people with advanced dementia. And again, when I rock up to do these jobs, and sometimes I don't know how we get the job, but I know nothing about the job at all. Nothing. Blank sheet of paper on which you can write. So you go and look at buildings, you go and look at dementia homes. And I have to say, I was universally massively depressed. I thought I'd probably top myself rather than being I mean, it was just so depressing, some of these places. And some of them are brand new. That's the thing that got me quite angry, actually. And you and I have paid for them. That's the other thing that even gets me even more angry. So here we have a situation with a very enlightened design champion for Fife. And what we wanted to do was a number of things for dementia. This is a place where, to be blunt, people will complete their lives. So the room shouldn't just be a room, which are 4 walls and a ceiling. It should have the sense, in a way, of being a little house. And even if people with dementia don't notice that, and you never know whether they do or they don't, their relatives may do. And so it becomes something more interesting than just a room. And basically, again, it's trying to orientate people. You come in, and you've got some social facilities in the centre, and it basically is the orientation is all around a garden. And we worked out that people, particularly at night time, can supervise people coming and going across the garden. So it is possible. So it's actually quite a revolutionary plan, believe me. And again, there's my diagram showing the different destinations as you enter. And the garden, before anyone moved in, and there's the idea of the individual roofed rooms, so that it's not just windows and a wall. They become like a little amalgamation of little tiny houses which people are living in, and you take the opportunity of a window and you turn it into a place, in this instance a corner window, so it becomes a window seat. And of course people who with dementia have, if they spend time in their rooms, which generally they're encouraged not to of course, but if they do, then it's a place to interact with the outside through the window. That's what you do. And that's terribly important to have that sense of sort of inhabitation there. And it's also terribly important with dementia to get light to get sunlight or the movement of light into a room. So every room, regardless of whether it faces north, south, east, west, always has light coming from the opposite direction because of the thing with the roofs. So this is someone who's never done a dementia home in their lives before. And then you also have the opportunity, we happen to have a very nice view, so you frame that in a typical Palladian country house kind of way and show, you know that famous romantic picturesque landscape idea where you see the foreground and the distance, but you don't see the middle ground, you know? It's an old trick. I've never had an original idea in my life, by the way. Well, this is, the only time we've ever got involved in a bid for a PFI hospital, which is not something I would support, but it's in St Andrews, which we were in the last 3. We had the Pyrrhic victory of every member of the medical staff and all the 3 GP practices voted for us to a man and a woman, but they still didn't give us the job. Anyhow, it's again, how could you make a sort of medium-sized hospital with no corridors? So there are 2 floors, it's built into the side of the hill, so the first floor gets bigger, but you come in, and again, it's exactly the same idea as the mental hospital in Belfast. You can see the snaking rooms, you can see the fact that people are circulating around a garden, and on this side, the different departments, the staff can sneak along corridors, but the public have different thresholds to different departments as they go around a garden. And on the first floor, it's the same idea. And here we didn't quite avoid the corridor. I'm afraid we couldn't avoid the corridor with the wards. That was a no-no, but we tried very hard. Anyhow, so we didn't win that one, which is a shame because I think that would have been the first hospital in Scotland without corridors. And that was the diagram that we did, showing I can't remember how many destinations there are there, but it's quite complicated. But it's about trying to have a plan which has got a hierarchy of places so that people never have that sense of complete bewilderment and disorientation that you do if you go to the Little France or St John's in Livingston or whatever. And then that has led quite interesting to a project which is not far off from going on site. And we're back in Northern Ireland again, in Belfast, and this is for something I also knew nothing about before I started, which is a proper mental health hospital. It's not a secure unit, but it's the next one down. And this is the idea that I thought to myself, could we make a hospital in the competition which is like grey walls? In other words, you have a series of interlocking gardens and find yourself well. And I like the idea of thresholds into gardens, and I love grey walls, and I love gardens and walled gardens and things like that. So the wards are not, I went and looked at lots of mental hospitals, and they all follow the same plan. They're a sort of cruciform plan with the nurse in the middle, 4 corridors and rooms around it, and funny little gardens in the corners. And then that cruciform plan is added to another cruciform plan, another cruciform plan, and then people are given a ball of wool at the entrance because you have no idea where you are. So here you come in through an entrance which is hopefully more like almost like a gatehouse in a way, because you're going from the outside and you go back to the outside again. You go into an outside cloister around a garden, and this is your first orientating device. And from there you go into a ward here, a ward here, a ward here, a ward here, or a ward here. And then once you get into the ward, again there is a racetrack corridor, but there are no corridors. All the orientation for all the patients of 20 roughly per ward. So in other words, we've turned the cruciform plan, which is horrible, we've completely turned it inside out. And this again will be quite a revolutionary plan, and it's all about orientating people around gardens. We've got a very supportive client who wants to use water and use all sorts of interesting plants and things. So that's our latest drawing of that circular cloistered courtyard before people, because the other thing is you go into these huge buildings and you're inside all the time. It's quite depressing, actually. I think it's important to go outside and then back inside again. And we've got the similar idea of the roofed rooms and the little gardens, the wards. And then finally, also in Northern Ireland, we seem to have got a bit of a run of luck in Northern Ireland. Actually, it's not accidental. There's one man who's just retired called John Cole, who was in charge of procurement, and he's the exception that proves the rule, actually. Most NHS trusts are dead from the neck up and haven't got a clue and aren't interested, basically, in architecture or any architectural ideas whatsoever or any innovation or anything. There you go. Anyhow, he's marvellous, but sadly he's just retired. But this is actually not for the NHS, this is the Methodist Church. It's very, very interesting. And when we interviewed for this job, I came to the conclusion there are two great big supertanker clients for dementia. One is the NHS, and one is these horrible, huge private companies who just make lots of money from granny farming, basically. And they won't change. They are supertankers, basically. They have their model. But suddenly a little organisation like the Methodist Church in Northern Ireland is really open to new ideas. So I said, no corridors, no corridors. So there's a diagram, and they wanted to have 8 houses of 8 people. And first of all, I persuaded them to make it single story, which I think is essential. So you have 8 rooms, and then those rooms are arranged. As soon as you come out of your room, you're in a social space. You're in a living room, dining room, kitchen space, which is your, as it were, your family room, like that. But that family room looks out at a garden. You're always looking out at landscape here. This looks into a garden. And then, that's a little sketchy thing of what it looks like. And then there are 2 put next to each other, so you can share certain things like a bathroom and staff and things like that. But you share an access. This is an open, glazed space. And then you put them all together in a big plan where you've got 8 houses all around gardens, and then you have the central facilities that you need, and then the entrance there. So as soon as you enter, you're into a big communal space, and then you go off in a journey which takes you to your individual house, and there's no corridors. And that's in for planning permission at the moment in County Down, right on the coast, a rather nice site. And good on the Methodist Church, because they're doing something they'd never done before, and they have faith to do something that hasn't been done before. And as you can see, the whole building is about walking in a garden, or through a garden, or adjacent to a garden to get to your destination. So that's what we're doing, but I'm not an expert in health, luckily. Thank you very much.
Well, I come from a slightly different perspective to Celine, because I'm designing, or at least I advise on design for the Dementia Centre for people with dementia. But basically, the need for outdoor space is the same really whoever you are and whatever your age. But I've found, with a degree of cynical history from the work that I've done in the past, that you actually have to persuade people of the actual need for outdoor space. So a little bit of my talk is about the history of outdoor space and health, and then the reasons why we need it. Now, the concept of having gardens for health is actually really old. And interestingly, in Roman times, they always had a courtyard in their hospitals because they needed to get their fighting men back fighting as quickly as they could. And that was the quickest way to get them back to good health. And then in the Middle Ages, if you weren't very well, there were hospices you could go to. And in return for care, you could work in their gardens or vineyards. And again, you were outside and getting a degree of good health from the outside spaces. And in the Renaissance, public hospitals actually had courtyards. This particular picture is an example in Spain. And that was the whole philosophy of hospitals having outside space so that you got the fresh air and exercise, which they believed was absolutely vital. In the 19th century, of course, we had Florence Nightingale, who was absolutely a most wonderful woman in getting her views forward and changing how we looked after health in the intervening period from the Renaissance, when I think it probably went into slightly the Dark Ages. And she said, second only to fresh air, I should be inclined to rank light in the importance for the sick. Direct sunlight and daylight is necessary for speedy recovery, and I'll come back to that later on because that somehow got forgotten during the time from then onwards. And then she says, and I mention of experience in promoting recovery, the being able to see out of a window instead of looking at a dead wall. And again, I'll come back to that in a little while. The bright colours of flowers, being able to read in a book in bed by natural light. Generally, it's said the effect is on the mind, but she perceived that it is also on the body as well, and it really promoted good health. And these are pictures, archive pictures from maybe the turn of the last century, beginning of the 1900s or a bit later, 1930s. The Elsie Ingalls, I think, is the one on the left, and the one on the right is it was the mental hospital which is where Napier used to be, up in Craig House. And there they believed in getting you out. In fact, even when I had my children, there was a balcony in the old hospital at the old Royal Infirmary where you could go out to and get some fresh air. And as long ago as 30 years, I mean, this is horrifying that this is 30 years ago, this American researcher said that it was so important to have a view when you're in hospital of the outdoors, not a brick wall, and his study was looking at those who had a view and those who looked on a brick wall, because those who looked out on something really nice didn't complain as much, they didn't need nearly as many drugs, and they got out quicker. And that says an awful lot. However, unfortunately, we've gone backwards in the current period of time, which is really sad. And if you get courtyards at all, if you look at the Western and our Royal Infirmary, there are courtyards, but they're locked. And in the Royal Infirmary, some rooms don't even have windows. You've got people in offices with no windows. You've got endoscopy with no windows. It's horrifying. And if you do get outside space, and these three examples here, this is a children's hospital in Seattle, has some outside space, but I mean, risk averseness, hey, that's lethal, isn't it? And this one, Hairmyres, I think I'm right in saying that's a hospital for people with mental issues, but if you went out in there, I mean, why would you want to go outside? It's dreadful. This is a brand new hospital, only very recently opened in Inniskillen in Northern Ireland, you know, state of the art, in the dementia ward, which of course is high upstairs. So although it has courtyards, you can't get to them. And this is a view from one of the bedrooms. And they had this farmer in this dementia ward who was being very challenging. He was a difficult patient. And then they thought, maybe if we give him the room with a view to the landscape, he'll be better. Of course he was. He could see what he was used to. The tragedy was none of them could get outside. There was so much wrong in that hospital. I got locked in the toilet. And I thought, if I get locked in the toilet, what are the people with dementia going to do? You know, I mean, hey, but let's move on from that. So these are the reasons that I usually say it's important to know about when you're arguing for outdoor space, which you do have to. That natural light and sunlight improve people enormously. It improves your sleep, your behaviour, sorts out SAD system, you know, seasonal active disorder, that's right, and circadian rhythm. But there's been so much research recently about vitamin D. I mean, it's out there. We need vitamin D, and Scotland is one of the most vitamin D deficient countries in the world, partly because we have grey skies, but you still get some even when the skies are grey, but largely because people don't go outside. And even when they're in hospital, they can't go outside. Being outdoors, and research has shown this, it improves cognition. That's a big thing. But it also means you can go and get a bit of peace and quiet when you need it. And exercise clearly helps many diseases. So this is the vitamin D bit. It improves, it's associated, its lack of, obviously, weak bones. And older people break easily. And if somebody aged breaks their hip and goes into hospital, the likelihood is, A, they'll be there for a long time, B, if they come out, they'll end up in a care home, and C, they're likely to be dead within 3 months. Those are the facts about breakages when you're old. So you need to avoid it, and vitamin D is one way of doing it. And there is an increased risk of malignancies, of cancer, obviously, but it's very small compared with all the benefits that actually being outside and getting vitamin D can give you. And believe me, you get a lot more from sunlight. You can't eat enough food to give you vitamin D. You need something like 19 cans of sardines a day to give you enough vitamin D. So, you know, and the other thing that's just come out very recently is this. August the 6th, 2014, increased risk of dementia and Alzheimer's with lack of vitamin D. It's associated with, it's not actually proven, but people with dementia generally have low levels of vitamin D in their system, and what they don't know is whether they're getting dementia because they've got the low levels of vitamin D, or whether it's the low levels of vitamin D are a result of the dementia. But it's associated with, and I think that's really important. The other thing is, coming back to Florence Nightingale, This isn't rocket science, is it? New Scientist, December the 14th, 2013. Fresh air kills airborne bacteria. So why can't we get outside in hospital? Why are they building, like they have in Aberdeen, a hospital with windows that don't open? So you can't even get the fresh air from inside. And UV light of that particular wavelength, which I don't really understand, attacks small cells like bacteria, but without harming larger human cells. So clearly, with the problem of antibiotics not being quite as efficient, fresh air is even more important. Now, there was a lot of very useful small studies, and they are small studies. But this one, again, 1992, so it's a heck of a long time ago, looked at 5 nursing homes in the States and compared those with gardens with those that didn't have them. And the ones with gardens, there were fewer falls, fewer incidents of challenging behaviour, better mental function, better memory stimulation, and of course, again, not rocket science, not so many bed sores because you weren't in bed all the time. And another study in which found that when you have, for the staff, a nice space to work, you don't get as much absenteeism, so you don't have the changeover of staff. And of course, it's expensive if you get a high staff changeover because you've got to advertise for staff. Gardening is a good mental workout, and it's very healthy for people to be involved in that because it requires planning and thinking, and for people with dementia, that can also be very useful. There's a centre, Hansel Centre, you'll know about that, I expect, for children with autism out towards the west. I've been there. Ayrshire, isn't it? That's right. And I remember going there and meeting a young lad who had been sent here almost as a last resort because he was so disturbed and very difficult behaviour. And he was put to working in the garden, and he'd made a friend, and he was charming, and I had a lovely conversation with him, and it had been the most miraculous change, being able to work outside and get that satisfaction. There's another little piece of quite interesting research which was produced by mind.org. It looked at the green agenda for health, and it noted how much green exercise outside benefited mental health. But interestingly, it doesn't work if you're walking in a shopping centre. And I can identify with that. That usually depresses me enormously, actually. So the exercise you might get, but you're not getting the green benefit. And this little diagram here shows all the reductions, so reduced depression, reduced anger, reduced tension, confusion, fatigue, reduced total mood disturbance with an outdoor walk, and an increase in vigour with an outdoor walk. And the blue ones are all the other ones. So clearly a green environment is really, really useful. This was, there's a wonderful book by Claire Cooper Marcus. It's about designing gardens for health. It's a great big fat book, and she lives in the States. She's actually British, but she was a professor at Berkeley. And this is a quote from some of her books of the people, how they reacted to having green space in hospitals. I used to work at another hospital without any gardens. No escape. The poor families have to visit the patients in their rooms. Here with the gardens and all the outdoor spaces, it's so much better. And somebody who's just had surgery says, I'm sitting in the garden, I feel the breeze on my face, the wind in my hair, it feels so good. So, my advice is you get your budget and you lock it away, you hide it under the carpet, you put it where nobody can get it, including the architect, I'm sorry, in many cases, because buildings overrun in cost, and you have to make sure quite often that you can get the money set aside for the outdoor space. And then you have to look at all these different things at the very beginning when you're planning the building, so that you get the outdoor spaces that are left around the building. Well, they shouldn't be left around the building, they should be created around the building with these right things. So the microclimate has to be okay. You've got to have the right orientation, shelter from wind, the right building heights to allow sun to get in. And of course in Scotland in the winter we have sun elevation of 10 degrees. In the summer it's fine, but it's a short summer. So you want to make sure nothing overshadows from the outside. Did you get upper level outside places, balconies and roof terraces, and that there's no noise? I went to look at a potential care home site in the south of England, and they bought the site, unfortunately, and we were sitting outside, it was a lovely day, talking about their plans around a picnic table, and suddenly this plane went overhead. Oh, fine, okay, that's interesting. Deafened. 15 minutes later, another one went overhead. Okay, and so it went on. They had got it under the flight path from Southampton Airport. That was never going to work because you can do nothing about that. So lots of things you have to think about. A welcoming atmosphere, so important that you have somewhere that's really nice to be, someone that makes you want to be in that space, like these gardens out here, which are incredibly welcoming. These, I have to say, are two of the more later Maggie centres. And there's been a great temptation towards signature architecture and signature landscape architecture, as I would call it, because basically, if I was a sick person, that would not encourage me to go out. And this one is great if you're up in a helicopter. But, you know, I don't know quite what they're thinking about. Design considerations, having spaces that connect with community facilities. There's an absolutely fabulous little garden in Kinross called the Potager Garden. It's a wee haven, a bit like this, and it's for use by schools, community people, people with dementia. There was a gentleman who went there and gardened every day. Absolutely fabulous. This is a scheme I was involved in Dunby Dykes in Edinburgh, where we created allotments. Unfortunately, I think it was very much the baby of the particular person in the council that I was working with, who was an absolute star. And then she got moved on to something else and then moved again. And I don't know what's happened because it requires a great deal of management to make sure that these kind of things work. And this here is a hospital in Singapore, a brand new hospital, which is either a hospital in a garden or a garden in a hospital. I mean, you can look at it either ways. It's surrounded by green space, which of course is easy when you live in Asia. And it has on the roof, or it had on the roof, allotments and games, and the allotments were used by people that lived around who hadn't got any open space, and the food presumably went to the hospital as well, some of it. Unfortunately, pressure on land is such that they've built upwards. And whether they've still got allotments on the even higher roof, I don't know. But it was a very brave idea, and they were very proud of it. Spaces that allow people to have choice. Now, these are all examples of places for people with dementia, but it equally applies whoever you are and wherever you are when you want to have outside space works. And interestingly, this was a care home in Australia for people from a farming background, so they had the tractor, the utility level, everything fabulous, and they loved it. This was a wonderful little lady in a care home in Shetland who I met. And I said, gosh, you're sitting outside. That's wonderful. You're always outside. Yes, because I can see so well to read my book when I'm outside. I only go in when the wind drops, and my jaw dropped. I thought, why do you go in when the wind drops? Because the midges are out, my dear, she said. And these are just lovely old ladies in a care home in England by a very good designer. And this was one in Belfast where each little flat had its own space. So he could wash his clothes. He maybe came from a military background, but he liked to wash his clothes and put them outside. And that was an element of choice for him to do what he wanted to do. You can also use gardens for therapy too. You can have handrails that help people walk around. You can have beds that you can reach at so that for physiotherapy, you can actually reach out and be encouraged to touch something, which is much better than having white coats persuading you to do things. You have places to sit in the sun, but with shelter, so that because not everybody likes to be in the open sunshine. But all too often you get these sort of things. The top is the green jungle with, just bird table and bird bath accidentally positioned. And this one is one where they've looked at the design a bit, and they actually took a wonderful cobblestone design by a very good artist that I know, but it was from a Chelsea garden. It was going free, so they took it, and it's really not appropriate for people with dementia because it's all scrolly, moving things. And then the sort of way these spaces are done with sharp corners and a big, rather boring water feature. So you have to think about the people that you're designing for. And cultural and religious backgrounds can be taken into account. There's a park in London which I've yet to visit, but it has a lot of design for people from different cultural backgrounds. And I'm told by the person that gave me the slides, well-maintained gardens give people a sense of security. I'm sure that's true, because the minute a space is not well-maintained, things get dumped in it, and then it becomes somewhere that people are frightened of. Clearly defined paths make it much easier for people to explore. You get a social gathering place. And if you've got plants and their perfume that can trigger memories for people from other ethnic groups, That's great, and that's why I always say, wherever you're designing in the UK, look at what grows there naturally, because that's what people are used to, and those are the things that will grow well. And art can be so useful. It's such a wonderful thing having artists involved. So I'll start with the positives first. Dementia Centre, we had some wonderful metalwork which echoed some of the things they were trying to do and meant that even in the winter time there was interest to look at. At hospice at Pollock, we had a north-facing bereavement garden. I wouldn't have chosen that orientation. We couldn't have a pond because there was no sunshine, but we had some lovely mosaics just to make it a place that was a little bit more soothing. And again, this park in London with some different kinds of ethnic design. But I mean, here's another couple of examples of presumably somebody being involved with an artistic background of some sort. But you do wonder, don't you, what you're meant to do in them. Always remember the user, because that's basically what you're wanting. You're not designing a signature garden, a show garden, something to make you look great. You're designing something for the people that use them, which can mean sitting on your own, having somewhere for a gossip, having the greenhouse to grow things in, having those kind of seats which are not, fine architectural art in a trendy way, but they're comfortable, they're basic, you can sit on them. They don't feel cold, they don't hold the water. They've got good arms to get up and down from. Raised planters, lots of different types. Sculptures that mean something. This is in Southern Ireland, in Dingle, where they have a sculpture to commemorate the dolphin that is in the bay. And it's loved by everybody. And of course, if you have things for children in places where older people are living, it gives a lot of interest to the older people. And it also means the child isn't saying, oh God, have I got to go and see Granny again? It's boring. You've got something that they're interested in as well. And also having light for nighttime usage, because I don't know how many of you are owls and how many are larks. I'm not a lark. Mornings do nothing for me, but I like to be up late. So on the few times you have a lovely balmy outside with good weather and warmth, which is not too often, but it happens. It's lovely to be able to go outside. So thinking of the lighting is really, really good. And that is just a very brief run through. I could go on for hours, you can probably imagine, but I think that's probably enough to get people hopefully talking about it.
I've been joined by Carol Sinclair tonight, the artist I mentioned earlier. Some of her work is on display in the far, and I'm glad to say that Carol's work is for view at Gayfield Creative Spaces. We've talked a lot about, well, three words come to mind: faith, hope and charity. You mentioned faith of planners, Richard, and faith in people who maybe didn't get a chance to know too much about your work before, but they had faith in you and they had faith in the concepts that you brought forward. And hope. And I take a lot of hope from what you're saying, in the sense that attitudes are changing, and I think you're getting that, and the message is getting across. And I did want to say charity because, as Celine mentioned, this is a largely charitable organisation, and I'm glad to say part proceeds from some of the sales of garden party or exhibition at Gayfield will go to the yard, and there are forms here tonight that if you choose to take away, you can do so. And Celine and the staff here are absolutely delighted to talk to you a little bit more about the yard, and Richard and Annie, I know, will be very happy to take your direct questions. So thanks again for coming, and do stick around and recharge your glass. Cheers.